Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and if we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Because this is our program and service review, there are some individuals who are not here tonight, so those that are watching may notice that there are a few people missing at the table, and that would just be normal protocol for this meeting, like the school attorney and our student reps and the acting district clerk. I'd like to start here with introductions. I'm Diane McBride, board president. To my right.
Hi, Anne-Marie Straczynski, board vice president.
May Abdullah, board member.
Nailana Selm, Assistant Superintendent of Student and Family Services.
Mary Ann Exler, budget technician.
Andy Whitmore, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations.
Dina Wilson, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction.
Pat McHugh, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources.
James O'Brien, board member.
Good evening, Nikki LaPlaca, board member.
Bo Wright, Superintendent of Schools.
All right. As I mentioned, this evening, this is our program and service review workshop, and I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent, who will probably turn it over to Mr. Whitmore.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn it over to Andy and Marianne to do the heavy lifting, but I want to start by thanking them for all the work that they've done to get the base budget squared away. As you know, we went through program and service reviews with every single department throughout the organization, and that's a pretty big task. I will say this, you know, I don't want to paint a doom and gloom picture tonight. I think we're actually, you know, very well positioned heading into the next fiscal year, and I think we have a lot of things actually that will work in our favor. However, I think, you know, the word that I want to use to describe what lies ahead, at least at this point, is uncertainty, because we don't know what's going to happen with state aid right now. So this has been a very different year for all the reasons that you can imagine, and that certainly has an impact on our operations and our finances. And I think that we have to plan on that all this is going to spill into the next fiscal cycle. So, you know, I think if I had to summarize the picture in a sentence or two, I think that we're in good shape. I think that we're well positioned, but there is a lot of uncertainty that surrounds school financing in New York State right now. And so having said that, again, I thank Andy and Marianne for all the work that they've put into get us ready for the start of the budget season, even though budget season is kind of the whole year at this point. But I'll turn it over to them to walk us through the base budget.
Thank you, Bo. It certainly is a whole year for Mary Ann. I mean, she started back in August with head count. As you know, 2/3 of or 3/4 of the budget is personnel related, so it's vital that we get that right. So Mary Ann spends a lot of time going through the current staffing charts and meeting with administrators and understanding where we are with personnel. And that's we really do start the budget in August and gear up heavily in September. She looks at last year's actuals then and starts analyzing that, and gets us ready for the October meetings that we have with the superintendent and a lot of his staff who supervise the various departments. But even though that part was normal, it really is a surreal year. As the superintendent said, what we're doing for this budget is rolling over a budget that will support next year's programs as if we're back to normal. But as you know, we were anything but normal during this whole preparation. School is closed, then it's open, it's partly open. Just so many changes going on. It's really tough. So what we tried to do in this budget is plan somewhat back to normalcy next year. We're hoping the vaccine kicks in and we can finally get back to school. So that's what this is, but you'll see a few places in the budget where we do account if there are things that happen. Some of the highlights, if you go to the page that says base budget assumptions, the inflation rate we use for things that we don't know. If there's contractual costs, we use the contractual cost. If we have specific information, we'll use that. But for things, and this is mainly materials and supplies, things that we don't know, we apply an inflation rate. So Mary Ann gets that in September, because that's when she's starting to pull together a lot of the detail for the budget. So in September, the year-over-year inflation rate was 1.2%. So where we don't know actual cost, we use that inflation rate. For BOCES, we use 3% year over year, just because we don't know their rates yet. We're earlier in the budget process than they are, but like us, they're mainly people dependent. A lot of what they do is very people dependent, and as you know, salaries, wages, and benefits are rising more than 1.2%. So we use 3% for our BOCES cost. Our benefit rates, benefits are a significant portion of our budget. The civil service retirement, so these are the non-teaching staff, the non-certificated employees. There was a significant increase in that rate. The rate went from 14.5% to 16%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's about an 11% rate increase. So not only, and then you add on top of that the salary increases. So this is one area that was a significant increase this year. Whereas the teachers' retirement system, which is on a different fiscal year, it's on a normal school year basis, their increase was only less than 0.5%. This year we're at 9.53%, and they're projecting the top it'll go as 10%. It might even come in a little bit better than that. Social Security stays at 7.65%. Health insurance, we know that the first half of the year, 21, it's a 4% increase. We never know what the following year will be, but we use 4% for the whole year. Chances are the actuals will be a bit higher than that, but we had some favorability in health insurance coming into this year, so we're going to grab that favorability, and we planned a 4% year over year for the total year. And one thing that we're going to need the board's permission or discussion with you, one thing we did do, at the end of last year, you allowed us to increase the average class size by 1 at the elementary levels. Because of the disruption this year, we really don't know the impact of that. So we're proposing to carry that over next year, but that's up to the board. If you don't want to keep that waiver for another year, you know, you can certainly tell us that, and then we'll adjust the head count accordingly. But right now, what we have in here is a carryover 1 more year of the class size average increase of 1 at elementary.
So that's not increasing that increase in class size any more than it is right now, just what we already approve?
Exactly.
Okay.
You improve the increase for this 2021, we'll use that same number for 21-22. And the other big unknown is state aid. We don't even know where we stand this year on state aid, let alone next year. So we have no idea whether we'll need significant reductions or not. So nothing in this budget is geared towards reductions. We'll plan those as the budget cycle unfolds. So really, this is the base budget to support every program and service that we have this year, how to support it going into next year. As you know, the governor has threatened a 20% state aid increase if we don't get federal stimulus. We have thought probably at least 3 times over the last 7 or 8 months that it was close, we were getting it. We still don't have it. We think we're close again. We're hoping the political turmoil will calm down at the federal level and we'll get something. But if we don't get any federal stimulus, that flows through to the state level and then back to the schools and the local level, we know that we could be as much as up to a $10 million deficit this year, and that deficit would roll over to next year as well. The good news is that the board, at the end of last year, the end of last year's budget cycle, when the pandemic started, knew that finances would be tough, and already were very proactive in funding reserves and taking some cuts in last year's budget. So we are well positioned, but if the state aid reductions hit this year plus next year, there would need to be cuts. Even though it's $10 million, we're comfortable we can absorb it this year because of the actions taken by the board. But next year would be a different story. But we feel it's very premature to go through and get people very concerned about jobs when it may not be real. Even the state controller tells us, don't cut, don't cut. People are pretty sure that we'll get some federal stimulus. Any questions about assumptions? All right, we'll go to the next page, the page that says composite budget at the top. And if you go to the fourth column where it says budget to budget, amount and percent, I'm going to just talk, I'm not going to talk to each line item. I don't want to keep us here all night, but I'm going to focus on things that have a 4% change, plus or minus, plus they're over $40,000. If it's a small, even if it's a big percent but a small dollar amount, I won't talk about it. So if you go down to the fourth line that says legal, that's our first area that has over a 4% change and is over $40,000. It's actually up 42%. And the reason is we've incurred significant amount of incremental legal costs this year with a pandemic and getting a lot of legal advice how to handle things with that. We've had personnel issues. We've had the Good Shepherd facility, some of those issues. We've had a number of special ed hearings. So this year, our legal costs have been up significantly, so we're increasing our budget next year. We think some of those costs will continue into next year. If you go down to the next section under Human Resources and School Accountability, it says, the third line says in-service training and staff development. That's up about 18%, $77,000. The big reason for that is tuition reimbursement. The district has always supported tuition reimbursement for folks to further their career and get advanced degrees. It's contractual. And this year we happen to have 5 people going for advanced degrees, 3 of them in a doctoral program, and we expect that to continue into next year. So most of this increase is for the tuition reimbursement. It's a bit of an anomaly, but we think it'll be a couple of years before it trends back down. If you go down under curriculum supervision and school programs, subject area supervision, $283,000 decrease, a 30% decrease. This is the area, if you remember, we reduced a director position, we reduced a couple of TOSAs, and we reduced a clerical support in anticipation of the big cuts that are coming. So this picks up that reduction. We tried to make cuts away from the classroom, but still anticipate the financial shape that is arising from the pandemic. If you go down a little bit further in that same area, it says Remote Learning Academy, $126,000 budget-to-budget increase. It says NM for not meaningful because there was no budget for that this year. But given that nobody knows when the pandemic will be fully over, it looks like the state is planning on some sort of remote learning to continue on past this year. So this would fund a little bit of administrative oversight into next year's budget if we have to maintain some semblance of the remote learning academy. A few lines below that, interscholastic activities is up $42,000, a little over 4%, and most of that is driven by contractual increases in coaches' salaries. We had agreed to 3 years of 4% increases, and so this is catching us up to that. That's a big increase there. Down a little bit further, career education is down about $94,000, and that's a reduction of a couple of positions, one of them family and consumer science. So a couple of position decrease there. If you go down in the student and family services, the second line item under student management and school safety, a $98,000 decrease. That's another director position that we had eliminated at the end of last year. So there's a 31% budget decrease there.
Andy, going back up, I'm not sure my mic is on, so I don't know if we want to get, just for the sake of anybody trying to listen in, I'm not sure we're getting anything from the mics up front either. Anyway, Andy, if you could just, going back up to human resources and school accountability, could you speak to the Office of Strategic Initiatives increase in the student testing increase as well? So those percentages kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah, the Office of Strategic Initiatives, we put in some extra funding, about $30,000 increase in funding to fund the district priorities, basically the diversity initiative, if we want to hire some additional consultants. So it's funding to enable those priorities to move forward. We don't have specifics identified for its use yet, but it's to provide some flexibility so we can move forward with the initiatives. And then the student testing. We started the student testing. I believe that's where we outsource the scoring for the student testing. That started a couple of years ago, and it's very beneficial for our students because prior to this, we used to pull the teachers out of the classroom. They'd have to have subs in the classroom while the teachers scored state tests. So we've joined a BOCES COSER a couple of years ago that outsourced this. BOCES caught up to us, and to join that COSER, there's not only the cost of the service, which is about the $118,000 you saw last year, but there's also a $38,000, what they call a COSER fee, which is their cost to oversee the program. We didn't get charged that last year. We did get charged it this year, so we have to build it into the budget next year. The good news is this is aidable through BOCES aid, but it was a COSER that we hadn't been charged for before, so it hadn't been budgeted. All right, if we move down to the next page, the second line from the top on the next page, E&L services. 7% increase there, $94,000, and that's because we had to add a teacher. We did add an E&L teacher at Sherman, and that's demand-driven, the number of students who require the services. Student and family services, special education supervision, the first line under there, it's actually down $47,000. And there again, we took a reduction, a clerical position reduction. So that's what drives that decrease. If you go down about 4 more lines under speech services, you'll see a 10% increase. And really what that was some grant funding. We moved a speech teacher out of grant funding last year and put them into the general fund for next year. The number of teachers remain the same. And then actually up above it, we moved a psychologist into the grant. So it was just a shuffle between grant funding. There was no true headcount increase. A few lines down from that, alternative programs is down $123,000. And that's half a teacher, and that's really just driven by enrollment needs, what classes the kid needs, and also some paras that were reduced. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But we're able to get a 10% reduction on that line. And then the next line, Life Skills Transition Program, which is also at the Webster building, that's down 26%. And there again, it's a couple of paras that were reduced where they're trying to get away from a one-on-one para model for the transition students and go with shared paras, try and help them gain independence. So we're able to reduce 2 paras there. And then the tutoring center underneath it, a $22,000 reduction. And there again, that's probably more of reflection, future transition to the remote model. So we think these services could probably be provided remotely as they are this year and get some efficiencies out of it. So if you move down school finance and operations, Nate?
I'm not sure if I caught this, the special education program, there was a reduction of 65,000?
I'm sorry, which one?
The second line, down from special ed supervision, there's a special ed program. Top.
Oh, yes, we'll get, there's a little bit, we'll get to that detail later on that explains. And actually, special education overall, I mean, it's a slight decrease there, but if you probably remember the last few years, on average, that area has been increasing 9% a year on average because of the influx of students coming into our district. That has leveled off, so really, and you'll see when we get into the detail what's going on there. So back under school finance and operations, the only big increase there is the operations line. You'll see a $370,000 increase, over 7%. And that's driven, we put $250,000 in there for pandemic funding, basically. This year, we've spent well over $1.5 million between the end of last year and this year on PPE and disinfecting equipment. We're hoping we're over the bulk of it, but we added $250,000 for next year in case some of these, either PPE needs to continue, or some additional disinfecting equipment. So those were the 2 places, the RLA oversight that we talked about a minute ago, and the $250,000 under the operations were the two areas where we added money for potential carryover of the pandemic effects. And actually, one more place. If you go down under district-wide non-program, employee benefits is up 4.89%. ERS that we talked about, the rate increase there, and health insurance are the big drivers, but we also increased unemployment insurance. For a number of years, that's been about $15,000 a year. Excuse me, we bumped it up to $300,000 for next year, given the uncertainty of where we'll be. So that was, so there were 3 places where we've added to the normal rollover budget to account for things that might happen if the pandemic effects carry forward. The good news is, if you get to the bottom line, we're up $3.4 million, but that's only 2.5%. So if you know, remember, typically, we're up in the mid to high 3%. So for a rollover budget, we're actually in very good shape. And as you'll see, as May pointed out, a lot of that is the special ed, where it was basically flat. That's an area that $16 million that typically grows significantly, and this year it was flat, and we'll talk about the details in a few minutes. So that enabled us, as well as the cuts that you saw in a number of areas, enable us to get down to a 2.5% growth. So in a normal year, we would be ecstatic about that. The only thing is, we don't know what our what normal will be on the revenue side, so it remains to be seen. But the good news is, we are starting the process in a very good position. So not only did you position us well at the end of last year, our rollover costs are reasonable. Any questions on the highlights?
Andy, if I could just make a statement, though, before we move on, I think it underscores the importance of keeping, to the extent that we can, budget-to-budget increases low, budgeting conservatively, but then also, you know, as Andy mentioned earlier, the importance of reserve development, because it puts us in a position, long-term, where we can use reserve funds to offset budget gaps without making significant cuts.
Exactly, that's the key. Like this year, we could be up to $10 million short, but because of the reserve development the board's enabled over the last few years, we can cover it without major impact to teachers and students. So, yeah, it is key. We look at the balance sheet side, the reserve side, along with trying to control expenses on the budget side, because revenue is the big unknown.
Keeps things nice and smooth and level.
Yes, yeah. Our students have seen more than their share of disruption this year. They need some normalcy. So we'll try to provide that next year. All right, if we turn the page, it starts with the Board of Education, and on the second page of it, it says page 1. I'm not going to read through all of the highlights in the program overview. We'd be here all night, but please, you certainly email the superintendent if you have any questions. If you have any questions tonight, speak up. But if you go through the document later on and have questions, email the superintendent, and we'll be glad to respond. So the things I'll focus on the top page, staffing is in the bottom right corner. We'll always talk about staffing because that is such a significant piece of the budget. And then on the second page of each area, we'll look at some of if there's big dollar hits or changes. So in this page, if you look, staffing is flat. There's only the district clerk is funded in this area, and that stays the same. So if you go to the spending areas, the first area is the Board of Education, and even though there's no change there, I just wanted to point out we have kept your travel budget whole, even though this year you probably won't use it. I mean, it is important for the board to continue their professional development when the opportunities come back. So for the rollover, we've kept your travel budget whole, so hopefully there can be a return to some of the things that enable you to get your professional development. And really, the only other area is down a few sections under legal. That's the detail for the legal expenses that we talked about. It's a $40,000 increase. And really, that's what we talked about earlier. Between things like the Marketplace Mall pilot, some of our personnel issues, the Good Shepherd issues. So there's just a lot of things that are going on, and certainly the pandemic, there's so many things that we need legal advice and guidance on because the rules keep changing as each executive order gets listed. So we've increased that budget for next year.
I do have a question under the changes for 21, 22. I see explore conversion to electronic records retention. Is that a conversation that we'll have later at the table regarding this system that we're talking about maybe having? Because I'm not sure the whole board is knowledgeable of what that is.
Yeah, it's just explore, so certainly,
Okay.
right, it couldn't be done without the board's understanding and
Okay.
approval, and we really haven't put any specific funding in for.
Okay.
So it's something that probably the district clerk will probably bring to you at some point next year to see if you're interested in, but it's just explore.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, if we turn the page, this is the superintendent's page. Office of the Chief School Administrator and Community Relations, which reports up under him. You'll see here, there's no change in staffing. It remains the same at 4. If you look at the budget line items, the first line item, administrative salary under Chief School Administrator, that's the superintendent's salary. So this recognizes the fact he took a voluntary pay freeze this year. We had budgeted a pay increase. He took a voluntary pay freeze because of the issues driven by the pandemic, so that we'll budget it flat next year to account for the fact that he took it this year. The only other area under community relations, the BOCES services, that pays for our website and Thought Exchange, but we did put in a $5,500 increase there for our website for ADA compliance. A number of districts around the state and the country have been gone after because of their compliance for the visually impaired. There's things that need to be done, so that's an area we do need to look at and upgrade, so there is a little bit of funding to enable us to do that next year. Any questions in this area? All right, the next page is human resources. If you look at head count, there's a 0.5 reduction, and we used to have a part-time receptionist who helped staff the front desk at the administration building. That position's been eliminated. Somebody internally to the building, where the business office is helping provide some coverage as well, so we could eliminate that position. So that was the only change there. Under strategic initiatives, James, the first line, the purchase services, this is the line that drove the increase you were asking about, and we did add $30,000 in for our district priorities. And then the second line, the BOCES grant writing service went up higher than normal. We've hired through BOCES an additional consultant to help get us some additional grants, something above and beyond the normal grants that we normally get. The person has a lot of knowledge about all the state and federal grants, and so they're helping us pursue some new grants, so this should more than pay for itself. Under the in-service training and professional learning, this is where the tuition reimbursement came in. So the fourth line, it says 150 school tuition reimbursement. That's up $40,000. But also a couple of lines below it, the 400 line, it also has school tuition reimbursement. Basically, tuition is a combination of non-taxable. I believe it's $5,500. The first $5,500 of reimbursement or something to that amount is non-taxable to the employee, but if they get reimbursed higher than that, it becomes taxable wages, and that's why we budgeted in 2 places. So the 150 line is a salary line, so to the extent, especially some of the doctoral tuition is significantly higher than $5,500 a year, that gets added to their salary, so it's taxable. So that's why you see that in 2 places. Any other questions on this page? All right. We'll go to the next page. And as you know, Information Systems was realigned this year, so that's why it comes right after Human Resources and Strategic Initiatives. Dr. McHugh oversees this area now. So there was no change in total staffing, but there was some realignment of staffing. Our long-term director, who provided us great service for years, retired. So we have a new director who took over. She's actually a certified person. She has her teaching administrative degree, whereas the old director was under civil service. So under the salary line, if you go down the 150 administrative line, you'll see for the first time a budget line under the 150, which is certified. But what we did is we transferred funding from the 160 line, the non-certified line. So there was no net increase. There was actually a net decrease. But we also promoted one of our senior application specialists who's been providing a lot of guidance to the department and is crucial to helping the new director integrate into the district and provide a lot of support. So they've worked very well together because he's developed his leadership skills over the last number of years and is able to help guide the department and help the new director ease in. And she's done a wonderful job too with all the changes that we had. The amount of work and pressure that's on this department is amazing. And they've come through and done a great job with all the just going to remote learning and all the analysis we need with the pandemic effects. They've worked very well together. And down under student testing, James, is the piece that you had pointed out earlier. It increased from 113,000 to 152,000, and the bulk of that is the new administrative COSER fee that we got charged for the first time this year. So we wasn't in this year's budget, but we'll add it to next year's budget. The ASI still believes this is a crucial service. I mean, they provide a good service, they do quality job in their scoring, but even more importantly, we don't have to pull teachers out of the classroom. So it enables continuity for our kids. Those were the only big changes there. Any questions in this section? Okay, the next page, Office of Instruction. This is where we talked about the number of reductions that we made. We're trying to keep them away from the classroom. So we eliminated a director position, a clerical support position in this department, and 2 TOSAs, both a reading and a math TOSA, teacher on special assignment, who provided a lot of coaching. But because of the budget crisis at the state level, we're starting to make reductions. So these people provided great service, needed service, but we've got to start squeezing, so we're trying to keep it away from the classroom. Under the budget area, the only big changes are subject area supervision, and you'll see the reductions. The administrative salary line is down from 624,000 to 530. And that's the director position, and underneath that are the 2 TOSAs positions that were eliminated, so that went to 0. And then the third line, the clerical, that's where we took out a clerical position from that department. We went from-
Hey, Andy, just to clarify, was it not 2 director positions, or is one of the directors
There's one in
somewhere else?
another area.
Okay.
Yep, so one in this area and one under Student and Family Services. Any other questions in this area? All right, next page, technology integration. This was another area that was hit hard with the pandemic and all the changes that had to be made quickly. As the superintendent had told you earlier in the year, we basically created a whole new district with a remote learning academy, and this department did it along in conjunction with some of our school counselors with all the scheduling. They spent nights, weekends to enable the start of school with a remote learning academy. So they've done an amazing job. We obviously, with a whole new structure, we needed even more administrative oversight. It could not be absorbed because of the magnitude of the work. So we added an assistant principal position and 1.5 admin support. And these, even though they're added this year, they weren't budgeted this year, but next year we'll budget them just because we fairly sure the state will have us continue some level of remote learning. And so we want to have the resources to support that. Under the budget area, not a lot of big changes, other than down at the bottom, the Remote Learning Academy. We are budgeting the AP and the 1.5 clerical support, so that is new. But even with that, the overall budget-to-budget increase is only 2.5% for this area.
Quick question.
Yep. That's why we're here.
Right under that, the supplies and materials, I see a line, but there's no dollar amounts. Are we not planning to put dollars in for supplies and material for Remote Learning Academy? Or is that just something as we go down the road we may add to?
We'll see. What we'll probably do is realign from school, because obviously if
Okay.
a number of kids are pulled out of the
Right.
schools, they'll need fewer supplies and materials, so it'll be a realignment. So you'll
Okay.
probably see actual spending there this time next year, and it'll just be a budget realignment. So our number of kids hasn't changed, but
Right.
where they are has.
All right, thanks.
All right, next area, interscholastic supervision. No change in staffing, and this is an area the athletic director told you last board meeting. We were able to add a girls' golf team this year and absorb it within the current budget. So he was very excited about that. The, under the budget areas, the only changes, we talked about coaching, and that's the 4% contractual. We're catching up to the contract that provided some increases for our coaches. And the 490 BOCES line went from $12,000 to $24,000. And that line funds two things. One is Family ID, which allows our families to submit physicals online and to the nurse's office. But the other thing is Huddle Video, where we videotape a lot of our games. All of the schools have increased the number of games that they're videotaping. And this year, because of the pandemic, they're actually live streaming a lot of games. So we increased the cost. We don't know how much will continue next year, but we're confident there'll be some higher level of videotaping next year. So we increased the budget for that.
And with that light rental that we had, that's under the highlights, was that under supplies and materials that would fall under? Up at the top, it says highlights, light rental to accommodate.
Yeah, that would be under the 400 contractual expenses.
Okay. Thank you.
So, yeah, that's where we rent indoor practice time, light
Okay.
rentals, things like that. Any other questions?
The live streaming was very well received this year, especially given the
Right.
circumstances where people couldn't attend events in person.
Okay, the next page, regular school. This is, as you can imagine, the single largest area of the budget. A lot of dollars flow through here. As we talked about, the staffing assumes that the board allows us to carry over the same class size this year into next year, and that was at elementary, we had increased one. So if the board decides not to allow that, we'll adjust the budget, but at this point, that's what it assumes. If you look at staffing, Under assistant principals, there's a 0.6 decrease from 9.6 to 9. And that's a position that was shared at the transportation center. The other 0.4 is in transportation. Really, we're hoping we would get some help, support with families and students out of this position in transportation. And also, it gave added support at the high school level. We didn't get the level of benefit improvement we thought we would get, so we've eliminated this position because of trying to reduce the budget. So 0.6 of the reduction is here and 0.4 under transportation. So really, it was a realignment of the person. There was an opening, and so the person was moved. If you look under the teaching, there's a number of changes. All of these are enrollment-driven, so I'm not going to go through each one. They're just enrollment-driven changes, so we're projecting what we'll need for next year. The teachers on special assignment went from 7 to 6, and that was another TOSA position, an ELA at the junior high school level position that we eliminated. Excuse me. And then the paraprofessionals, we didn't get some of the budget reductions we had hoped for, so that instead of reduction, it went back up to the 28 that had been there, so we're going to budget since we weren't able to yield it. So overall, though, this area is pretty flat in staffing. If you go down in dollars, the supervision piece, it's really just inflationary, contractual, nothing significant. Under the teaching regular school, same thing, they're contractual increases. Until you get down to the fourth line under substitute teachers, there's a significant increase there from $1,450,000 to $1.6 million. And that's a reflection of basically the area-wide shortage of substitute teachers. We had to increase our per diem rate between $15 and $20, depending on the type of sub, to be able to attract, especially in today's environment with the pandemic. There's fewer subs and there's potential for more teachers to be out. So we increased our daily rate, and we'll carry that forward in the next year. So that drove the increase there. The next increase is the 470 line, tuition to charter schools. And we are seeing a little bit of growth in our number of charter school students. So we're up to 27 students in charter schools. And we pay about $14,000 each. So as you know, charter schools, even though they're privately run, they're publicly funded. So for each one of our resident students who go to a charter school, we have to pay tuition for them to go there. So that's a bit of an increase there. Under career education, instructional salaries, you'll see some decrease there, and that's the reduction of 2 positions, as well as some turnover savings in that area. So all in all, the bottom line for that area is up $1.1 million, about 3.2%. And because, as you know, our contractual increases tend to be in that range, this piece of the budget is people, and that's a more normal, typical contractual rate increase. Still not unreasonable. Any questions in this area?
Andy, if the increased class size didn't continue into next year, what's the potential cost impact?
I would,
Roundabout.
probably knows better, 6 people maybe? 9?
9.
So you're talking $650,000 to $700,000. So definitely a significant hit.
Thank you.
Okay, the next page is student and family services. So the superintendent asked about the other director position. This is where we see the decrease under the staffing. We eliminated the Director of Student Management position. So trying to consolidate our administrative staff to protect the classroom, even though we also had to take the increase in class size at elementary. So we're squeezing in both sides. But that's where that reduction shows up. So if you go down, the first section is just inflationary increases, but under student management and school salary, that first administrative salary line, that's where the decrease in that position is showing. It's reflected there. And the only other big change is the 490 BOCES visitor management system line. It increased from 11,000 to 36,000. So that's our Raptor system that if visitors come into our main offices, they have to show ID, and we process them through that system to make sure there's no legal barriers to them entering the school. It's also where we added the COVID screening test. So this increase enables us to purchase and maintain the COVID screening piece, and there is also a bit of hardware equipment replacement in this budget. So that's driving the increase there. But overall, because of the position decrease, we're down almost $100,000 in this area, or 16%. Any questions?
Just one thing to point out that I think is important for us to consider going forward, especially if we're in a position where we have to make reductions. The administrators, when you're focused on headcount and how much of the budget they actually make up, they gave more than their share when we made those reductions last year. So it's something that we need to consider in the event that we have to make reductions going forward.
Yeah. And this area, as you know, despite the reductions, has had a tremendous amount of increased responsibility this year with a lot of the pandemic response. It's setting up the screening system, the testing that we need to do to enable us to stay open. There's just all the safety protocols. So it's a very busy area. The next page is counseling, mental health, and E&L services. So the head count there, you'll see the staffing, the last line item, E&L teachers. We added 0.8, and that was a position at Sherman due to increased demand. On the left side, if you look at the E&L enrollment, you'll see that the general education number is up, and basically because we were closed at the end of last year, we couldn't do the normal testing that they do to allow kids to leave E&L services. So typically when they leave, they go down to that third line that says former L. So that line is down because nobody left, and the ELL line continues to be up because we couldn't test anybody out. If you look at the budget in this area, most of it is inflationary or contractual rollover. If you look at under counseling, the 400 district priority mental wellness, we did increase that a little bit higher than inflation because of all the pandemic issues. There's a lot of need both in the schools and with staff, and so this enables us to continue some of the staff workshops that this area has started to offer this year that the staff have found very beneficial. So a little bit of extra funding to continue that. And then down at the bottom, the last line under E&L services, you'll see the dollar increase for the 0.8 FTE position that we added. So overall, this area is up about 3.2%, and it's mainly people-driven. And so that's what you would expect. Yep.
Can you refresh my memory for me, Andy, under health services, the 400 contractual expenses, what's included in that area?
believe it or not, we have to pay for health services at other districts. And really, that's our students who go to private or parochial schools. The district where those schools are located have to provide the health services for those students, and then they bill us back. So whether it's McQuaid or Mercy,
Gotcha.
there's the city of Rochester provides services for a number of reasons. Our kids who might be at Strong, so these are billed through there.
All right, thanks.
The nurse at Norman Howard.
Pardon me?
The nurse at Norman Howard.
That's right, yeah. We also have to provide services for private schools in our district, so Norman Howard, we have a nurse there, and then we turn around and bill out, so on our revenue side, you'll see a little bit of revenue coming in for that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next page, special education. So this was definitely a bright spot this year. As you know, and we know, we've had a number, for the last few years, a number of kids move in. And so this budget has averaged 9% growth over the last few years. This year, it's been stable. So last year, it leveled off. This year, it continues to be stable. So we're budgeting basically a continuation of normal. There is a little bit of reduction. The CPSE chair, we reduced a position there, and it's being absorbed by some of the existing coordinators. Teachers, at the end of last year, we looked at how we delivered services, and were able to reduce some teaching positions. So that's there. Administrative support, we're down one headcount there. And then our paras are, there's an addition of one there, which is IEP driven, and psychologists are down a little bit, but that was just a move to the grant. So you saw that our speech teacher costs have gone up because we just switched speech for grant. But overall, the staffing is down slightly. If you looked at the administrative salaries, that's the reduction, the CPSE support, it's being absorbed by the coordinators, so there's a little bit of savings there from $300,000 to $296,000. If you go under the next area, the special education program, instructional salaries is where we reduced a net of 1.5 teachers. Plus we got some turnover savings there. So between the turnover savings and reduction of headcount, we're actually down $160,000 year over year. Then the two big areas, the 470 tuition and 490 BOCES services. These are our high-need students where we can't support them in district with the level of service that they need. Sometimes they go to private schools like Mary Cariola. Sometimes they go to BOCES. The majority, vast majority, do go to BOCES, but if they're very high needs, they might go to Mary Cariola or School of the Holy Childhood. And there was just a bit of a realignment. We had a few fewer BOCES placements, but an increase in our private placements, high need, so the tuition. So even though one line is up, the other's down, so the net is only about a $27,000 increase. So this is something where Mary Ann and I sit with the special ed department and go through child by child who we expect to remain next year. We build in some contingency for newly identified students. And overall, because things have leveled off, this expense is pretty neutral. Now, May, does that get to your question?
Yes, thanks, Ann.
Okay. And then the only other area is under speech services. It's up a little bit higher than inflation, and that's just a piece of a teacher was taken out of the grant. But overall, this area, the bottom line, if you look it's down slightly, so it's flat. So this is a significant piece of our budget. It's over 15% of our budget, and it's a 0% change year over year. So this was one of the big drivers to enabling a net 2.5% of the total budget. Any questions here? Okay, another area where we got some cost reductions, the alternative secondary programs in the Webster building. These are things cited at the Webster building. Before we look at staffing, I just want to draw your attention to the left side, the student enrollment data. The last line is our homeschool students. So that's up almost 80, it's up 78 students. So as you can imagine, with the pandemic and the risk that some of our higher need students have, or some of the parents see, our homeschooling is up. So about 78 kids, which actually probably isn't as many as we suspected going into it, but still a significant increase. On the right side, staffing, teaching is down just a little bit, and that's purely based upon the needs of the students, the course needs that they have. The paraprofessionals are down by 3, and we'll get into that detail down in the budget line items. So under the alternative high school program, the second budget section, the second to last line, it says paraprofessional/youth assistants. That's where we're down 1. And that's purely IEP driven, the needs of the students in the program. But under the next section, life skills, we reduced from 5 to 3, and that's where they're working hard to make the students more independent. So rather than having one-on-one aides, they're sharing aides. And these are the students who we try to give real life work experience. They're the older students. Excuse me. So they're helping out in our food services area, they help out in our facilities area, the food pantry, they did a lot of the setup with that, and we're trying to reduce their one-on-one aids as well, so we're giving them meaningful work experience and trying to develop their independence.
Andy, a question about that. I don't know if you know the answer. Are they able to do that kind of stuff this year with the pandemic going on, getting that work experience?
Yeah, I know they worked in the food pantry. I
Oh, that's right,
believe we
okay.
still have some at facilities. Milan, do you know where they're at?
Yeah, I was going to say the community version is what's more difficult, and so that's why we try to find other experiences within district that would still give them some of those life skills to be successful and independent as adults.
Great, thank you.
So a lot of our departments have stood up because these kids, as you can imagine, they require more supervision and support, but the staff really enjoys working with them. They're great kids, and so they're learning and helping as well. Okay, the next page, community programs and family services. Staffing. This is something that the board needs to be aware of and probably make a decision at some point. If you look at the staffing, the community education resource specialist 0.15 and parent family liaison 0.6, those aren't new positions. The issue is they used to be covered by Title III grant, which we are no longer going to receive the funding from it. So if we want to maintain these supports, they have to be general fund funded. And if you look down below in the budget section, under the last 2 items, those dollars aren't a lot, $9,300 and $22,000. But the other thing, all of the people, like UPK is still grant funded as well. Our UPK grant has been flat per student for at least a dozen years. And as you know, salaries and benefits have not remained flat. So we are starting to not be able to pay for the benefits. We're still being able to pay for some of the people in UPK, and in the EPI grant, we're not able to even pay for the people, some of the people. So these are supposed to be self-funded, grant-funded, but we're paying about $125,000 of benefits now out of the general fund next year. Less than that this year, but by next year it'll be up to $125,000. Plus, we're starting to pay people, so there's $30,000 there. So this is real. These are non-traditional K-12 programs that are typically funded by the general fund. So the board's going to have to make a decision. These are vital services, they're very beneficial services, but they've historically been self-funded. So we'll need some guidance. Are you okay with transitioning some of the costs of the general fund, or do you want to reconsider it? So we won't ask tonight because it's it's new, but we want to put it on your radar because it is a change. And I would suspect a lot of this will be depending upon where our revenue ends up, because it's not significant now, but if we have to make deep cuts in other programs, this is probably an area you might want to look at. If our revenue ends up being okay, you might want to keep it because they are such beneficial programs. Any other questions in this area? Okay, next page is school finance. Finance, it's pretty boring, no changes in staffing. The budget increases are just the normal inflationary. So there was a little bit of turnover savings, so the budget dollars are pretty flat year over year. Any questions here? Next page is operations and maintenance. Staffing here did increase. So what we did here, we're adding 2 floater cleaners. As you know, keeping our buildings clean and disinfected is vital to enable them to remain open. But like everything else that's affected by the pandemic, this is an area where we often have people out anyways on a routine basis. And now with the pandemic, we've had a number of staff who are quarantined. A few members have actually caught COVID, but yet we still have to clean and disinfect. So what we did, we added 2 floating positions this year to ensure that we can continue to clean and disinfect every night. And so we're proposing to carry those positions over next year. We think it's vital that buildings every night be clean and disinfected, and we can't do it if too many of our staff are out. Right now, we've had nine cleaners out. So between the floaters, our substitutes, and we're actually having our mechanics work overtime to do disinfecting at night, we're covering it, but we think it's important. We had some additional coverage.
That just made me go, wow. There's a lot of people working a lot of extra.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have great people. I mean, our high school is a perfect example. They'll do anything and everything that they need to do to keep school open. But with all this number of people, there's going to be illnesses, and this is an area we've had a number of staff out, either catching COVID or being quarantined. And so we need to draw in people from other buildings to help. It's a large building. Our number one goal is to keep school open, and so, but we need to do it safely.
You know, we received some good news yesterday from the governor in terms of, we saw that his office is willing to demonstrate some flexibility with schools around COVID-19 testing requirements as we move between zones. So we're encouraged by that. But the issues that Andy is speaking about, those are real, and we've communicated not only with the local Department of Health, but also with the county executive, that even if we make all the right moves as far as testing goes, we talked about some of the challenges as they were written in terms of meeting those requirements. You still may see local districts have some intermittent school closures because of inability to staff. And so we've been lucky, and in the sense that we've had a lot of people step up and had some fortuitous bounces in terms of who had to quarantine and who didn't with certain departments, but especially with some of the operational departments, we're running really thin now. So again, it just speaks to the importance of preparing and planning for having contingency plans in place, and being able to maneuver financially in the event that we have to do some unorthodox things with some of these different departments.
So if we look at the budget line items, under operations, the first section, that top line, that's where we've added in the 2 floating cleaning positions. So we also had some turnover savings, so the budget is really within the inflation level, plus including the 2 positions. But where it's not, the bottom line, supplies and materials, from the 346 up to the 630, that's where we added the additional 250,000 for PPE purchases if they're needed next year. And this is an area we'll keep an eye on as the budget year unfolds. If we find with vaccinations and we think we can go back to school with normal, and we still have plenty of if we have plenty of PPE in the warehouse, we might be able to trim this. But for now, we think it's an important placeholder, just so we have something to react with. Other than that, everything is pretty much inflation. So this area in total is up 5.5%, but without the PPE, it'd only be up 2.4%. Any other questions here? All right, next is pupil transportation. Under staffing, here's where you see the assistant principal position was eliminated, and that position combined with the portion that was in regular schools is now filling an empty position. So we're taking that out. Other than that, staffing remains the same. Our budget remains the same, but we're currently 26 bus drivers under budget. So we've got 13 out on long-term leave, and we've had, especially at the beginning of the school year, a number of resignations because bus drivers, many of them are concerned about their health. I mean, they're riding in an enclosed vehicle. We try and keep as much fresh air flowing through it as we can and separate the kids, but there's still a number of people who are concerned because either they had health conditions or they lived with family members who had health conditions and they don't want to risk it. So we are severely understaffed here, and despite the high unemployment, we cannot hire. We're getting, we actually, one of the e-newses that went out generated a bunch of interest, but we're still losing people faster than we're getting them in. And this is an area of major concern because as the superintendent talked about staffing to keep open schools, we are on the edge in this department. So the people who are there, we owe them a lot of thanks and gratitude for plugging away, and every day they're combining routes and trying to fill the gap, so we're limping along. So the budget is no change, but we haven't been able to staff to the budget is the concern. So down below in the budget area, the middle section contractual, there's not much of a budget-to-budget increase, but if you look in 1920, the actual of $400,000 was a lot higher than budget. We expect that to continue, but we're not budgeting for it because we're budgeting for full staffing, and the contractual piece is if we can't fully staff, then we do contract busing. So we don't want to double budget, but chances are you'll probably see the contract transportation actuals be a lot higher than the budget, but our actual spending will be under budget in the staffing piece. But this is an area that for our out-of-district runs, which we have lots and lots of them, we're able, we've worked with our bus unit, and they've agreed to let us outsource some of those runs if we can't get staffing internally.
Andy, a quick question. So the 400,000, that was up to the pandemic?
Yeah, that was just through mid-March. We probably would have spent double that because we were starting to experience severe shortages last year, so we were relying more and more on contract services. And that's when you can find it. I mean, we've been contacting lots of outside companies, and there's limited support there. As you know, bus drivers are short everywhere around the county, around the state, and around the nation. It's a tough job, and we keep increasing the demands. We add charter schools, we've added homeless and foster child, transportation, all for good reasons, but it's straining the system beyond its capacity. All right, next page, employee benefits and interfund transfers. So under the budget area, the first line item, the state retirement system, and that's ERS, the civil service piece. That's up almost 500 or over $500,000, and that's due to the rate increase that we talked about. It's a 1.5% rate increase, but over 11% actual increase plus our staffing or our wage increase. Our life insurance, if you go down about 5 lines, is up higher than inflation, and that's experience. You know, unfortunately, over the last 3 years, we've had a number of employees pass away while in service, and so the life insurance company has paid out a lot more in benefits, and they're collecting in premium, so they've had to raise their premium. We're fortunate they haven't raised it a lot more, but it's driven by the experience rating that we've had. Then the next line item, unemployment insurance, that's the piece where we increase it to 300,000 from 15,000, not knowing what might happen with our state aid and if we have to make cuts. Already, first quarter of this year, our first bill was over $120,000, so that's just for 1 quarter. So as you know, what the enhanced benefits are important to the people who need it, but unfortunately, they cost us a lot and they keep us from hiring. We have lots of job openings, whether it's cleaners or bus drivers or even paras that we can't fill. And a big reason is with the enhanced unemployment, but we are paying for it on the backside. And this is an area where the board put some extra funding into our unemployment reserve last year, so we'll probably offset some of this increase with reserve funding next year. Then the next item is the hospital and medical insurance. It grows from 17.2 million to 17.9. So it's a big dollar increase, but that's only a 4% increase we're assuming. So we know that's good for half a year. The second half will probably be higher than 4%. I mean, our average is probably closer to 7% year over year, but because we did have some favorability, we're keeping the budget at 4%. The other area to look at, if you go down to interfund transfers, the third line down, we're getting some good news in debt service. We continue to pay down our debt and not take on new debt, so we're able to reduce our budget by $100,000 there. And then below that, these are our transfers to our grants fund. Most of it is for our special ed extended school year, but the $125,000 increase is to cover the benefits we talked about for the UPK program and the EPI program, where the grants are not at a level to sustain the program, basically. So if we want to sustain the program, we're going to have to we are starting to subsidize it, and this is just reflecting it in the budget. So that's the piece I talked about earlier. There was only $30,000 in personnel, but there's $125,000 in benefits, because even the personnel who were still covered by the grants, there's not enough to cover their benefits. And then transfer to capital. That's just based upon our building aid. The board for years has reinvested the building aid we get from past capital projects into future ones. And so, same thing with bus purchases. So that, it's a slight decrease, but it's based upon our aid estimate, and so we continue that. So that gets us to the end. So to summarize what we talked about earlier, it's a $3.4 million year-over-year budget increase, but that is only 2.5%, which is much lower than what we've had the last few years. Last year, we had a 3.8% increase before we took the last-minute pandemic-related reductions. So the good news is we're supporting all of our current programs and services. We're maintaining a little bit of funding if the pandemic effects continue, and we're at 2.5%. So on the expense side, I think we're in good shape on our budget, but the big unknown is the revenue side. So we'll talk about that next year, January and February, as we get more information. Any questions on the budget? I'm not going to cover the last two, the school lunch and community programs, because those budgets won't be developed till later in the year, when we know what's going to happen next year. So we covered in an hour, a little over an hour, what Mary Ann has working diligently on for months, but we feel good about it. The hard work and working with all of the superintendent and his staff, we think we're in a good place. So we're at a good starting point, and we'll see how the year unfolds. Any other questions or comments?
Sounds like we'll have a few things coming back to us in the near future that we'll have to discuss, some probably challenging conversations, but until we know that revenue, it'll be hard to have some of those conversations for sure. But thank you to all of the staff, first of all, preparing this rollover budget for us, but everyone who is working so hard in front of the scenes, behind the scenes, and trying to keep this school district going, our kids in school, people stepping up and doing more than they would normally do in their position, because they know it's the right thing to do for our students, for our community. So I just think on behalf of the board, I want to make sure everybody understands how appreciative we are for all of the hard work that is happening at this time in these unusual circumstances. We couldn't do it without everyone. So I almost feel like I have to become a bus driver right now, so.
We'll take any help you want to give.
So does anybody have any other comments or questions? Superintendent, anything else?
No, again, I just want to thank Andy and Mary Ann for the work that they've done in terms of preparing this. And I also want to commend them because, like I said, I think we're really, as you can see, we're well positioned. We've been able to control costs, everything that's within our sphere of control. I think we've been able to keep costs down going into the next fiscal year. And, you know, as we get deeper into the process, you're going to see that there are going to be some other factors that are going to work in our favor. But as Andy said, the big unknown is what's going to happen with state aid. And, you know, depending on what happens there, that could present some really serious challenges for us. But I will say, I think that we're in really good shape financially, and we're positioned as well as probably anybody in New York State because of the decisions that you've made over time. And I think it's important that, again, we continue to try to keep costs down to the extent that we can, conservative budgeting, but then also, you know, again, it's so important, especially right now, to continue to develop those reserves. Because at the end of the day, that's what saves our bacon when we have to make really difficult decisions. It keeps us from having to experience draconian cuts. So thank you for the work that you're doing to position us. And thank you for the work that all of you have done to position us, not just the last couple of years, but again, making smart decisions over time.
All right, anything else? So, I'm just going to say, for the preview, we have a meeting next Tuesday night here, providing that we stay in the zone that we are. We are making some preparations if we were to slip into the orange and not be able to meet in person. I mean, we could have 10 people together if we were in orange, but that would exclude some of you from the table, and we don't want that to happen because we value your input at our meetings. And we wouldn't be able to have any audience. So we are looking at ways to make that happen if we should have to slip into the orange zone and have to have our meetings online. So hopefully that won't happen. Hopefully we'll be in person next week, and then we'll go from there. Anything else for the, all right, I will take a motion to exit our meeting. I got James and Nikki. And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week.